Welcome to Woo English, where you can learn English through engaging stories using clear and simple sentences. This story is designed to help you improve your language skills while enjoying an exciting narrative. Please remember, the purpose of this story is educational. We do not encourage or glorify any of the characters or their actions. We hope you enjoy the journey and find it both educational and entertaining. Don't forget to leave a comment and press the like button to reward us. Your feedback motivates us to create more content for you. Enjoy the story and happy learning. Chapter 1. Introduction to Victor Frankenstein. My name is Victor Frankenstein. I was born in the beautiful city of Geneva, a place where the mountains touch the sky and the lake sparkles in the sun. Geneva is calm and peaceful, a perfect place for a happy childhood. My family was well respected in the city. My father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was a kind and honorable man. He always helped those in need and was respected by everyone. My mother, Caroline, was gentle and loving. She dedicated her life to taking care of us. I had 2 brothers, Ernest and William, and a cousin named Elizabeth. Elizabeth was not my real sister, but I loved her as one. My parents adopted her when she was very young. She was beautiful and kind, with golden hair and bright blue eyes. We grew up together, sharing our dreams and secrets. From a young age, I was different from other children. While my brothers played games and ran in the fields, I loved to read books and learn new things. I was curious about the world and wanted to understand how everything worked. I spent hours reading about the mysteries of nature and science. One day, when I was about 15, I found an old book in our library. The book was by a famous scientist named Cornelius Agrippa. It was full of strange ideas and experiments. I read the book with great excitement. It was like a door opened to a new world. I felt a strong desire to learn more about science and discover the secrets of life. My father saw me reading the book and smiled. He said, "Victor, there are better books for you to read. These ideas are old and not useful anymore." But I did not listen. I was fascinated by the possibility of discovering something new and amazing. As I grew older, my passion for science became stronger. I wanted to study natural philosophy, the science of understanding nature. I dreamed of making great discoveries that would change the world. My father supported my dreams and arranged for me to go to the University of Ingolstadt in Germany. I was excited but also sad to leave my family and Elizabeth. They were my world, but my thirst for knowledge was greater. The day I left Geneva was full of mixed emotions. My mother hugged me tightly, and Elizabeth's eyes were full of tears. My father shook my hand firmly and said, "Follow your dreams, Victor. Make us proud." At the University of Ingolstadt, I found myself in a new and exciting environment. The city was bustling with people from all over the world. The university itself was a grand and impressive place, full of eager minds and great teachers. I felt a sense of purpose and determination as I walked through its halls. My first professor was Mr. Waldman. He was a brilliant scientist and a kind man. He saw my passion for learning and took me under his wing. He introduced me to the latest discoveries in chemistry and physics. Under his guidance, I learned about electricity and magnetism and how these forces could be used to understand the natural world. But my mind always wandered back to the idea of creating life. The old book by Cornelius Agrippa had planted a seed in my mind that grew stronger each day. I started to study anatomy and the processes of life and death. I spent long hours in the laboratory, conducting experiments and reading everything I could find about the human body and its mysteries. One day, I discovered something extraordinary. While working with electricity, I found that it could animate lifeless objects. This discovery filled me with excitement and fear. I realized that I was close to achieving something incredible, the creation of life itself. I decided to dedicate myself entirely to this goal. I isolated myself from my friends and family, working day and night in my laboratory. I collected materials from various sources, sometimes even visiting graveyards to find the parts I needed. My obsession grew, and I became more determined with each passing day. Finally, after months of hard work, I was ready. On a stormy night, with thunder crashing outside, I completed my experiment. I connected the final wires and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. As the lightning struck, the body on the table before me began to move. The fingers twitched, the eyes opened, and the creature took its first breath. But my excitement quickly turned to horror. The being I had created was not beautiful or perfect. It was a monstrous sight, with yellow skin barely covering its muscles and veins. Its eyes were watery and glowing, and its face was twisted in an expression of confusion and pain. I ran from the laboratory, unable to face the reality of what I had done. I hid in my room, trembling with fear and regret. I had played with the forces of nature and created a living nightmare. The creature disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with my guilt and terror. In the days that followed, I fell into a deep illness. My body was weak, and my mind was tormented by nightmares. My friend Henry Clerval, who had come to study at Ingolstadt, found me and nursed me back to health. He was a true friend, and I owed my recovery to his care and kindness. But even as my body healed, my mind remained troubled. I could not forget the creature I had created. It haunted my dreams and filled my waking hours with dread. I knew that I had unleashed something terrible into the world, and I feared what it might do. As I regained my strength, I received a letter from Elizabeth. She wrote about our family and how much they missed me. Her words were full of love and concern. I realized how much I had neglected those who cared about me. I decided to return to Geneva and try to find some peace. The journey home was long and filled with anxiety. I feared what I might find when I arrived. Would the creature have harmed my family? Would it be waiting for me? When I reached Geneva, I was relieved to see that my family was safe. They welcomed me with open arms, and for a brief time I felt a sense of normalcy. But the peace did not last. News came that a young boy, William, had been found dead, and a beloved family servant, Justine, was accused of the murder. I knew in my heart that the real culprit was the creature I had created. The guilt weighed heavily on me, but I could not bring myself to confess. I watched helplessly as Justine was convicted and executed for a crime she did not commit. My heart was broken, and my mind was in turmoil. I realized that I had to take responsibility for my actions. The creature was my creation, and it was my duty to find it and stop it from causing more harm. With a heavy heart and a determined spirit, I set out on a journey to track down the being I had brought to life. And so began my quest, a journey that would take me to the ends of the earth and test my very soul. I had created a monster, and now I had to face the consequences of my ambition and obsession. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and this is my story. Chapter 2: The Pursuit of Knowledge. When I arrived at the University of Ingolstadt, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The city was alive with energy, and the university was a grand place full of learned men and eager students. I knew that this was where I would make my mark on the world. My studies began with great enthusiasm. I attended lectures on natural philosophy, chemistry, and biology. My professors were brilliant men, and I absorbed their teachings like a sponge. Mr. Waldman, my chemistry professor, was particularly inspiring. He saw my passion for learning and encouraged me to explore new ideas and push the boundaries of science. As I delved deeper into my studies, I became fascinated with the idea of creating life. The old book by Cornelius Agrippa had sparked this curiosity, and now I wanted to turn that dream into reality. I spent countless hours in the university library reading about anatomy, the principles of life, and the latest scientific discoveries. I began conducting experiments in my small laboratory. My first attempts were simple. I used electricity to animate dead frogs and small animals. These experiments were successful, but they were only the beginning. I wanted to create a human being, to unlock the secret of life itself. My obsession grew. I started to distance myself from my friends and family. I rarely wrote letters home, and when I did, they were brief and lacked warmth. My mind was consumed with my work. I collected materials from various sources, often visiting graveyards and morgues to find the parts I needed. This work was gruesome, but I believed it was necessary for the sake of science. One night, after many months of hard work, I made a breakthrough. I had constructed a body, piecing together parts from different sources. It was a dark and stormy night, the perfect setting for my experiment. I connected the wires and prepared to harness the power of a lightning storm. As the lightning struck, the room filled with a blinding light. I watched in awe as the body on the table began to move. Fingers twitched, eyes opened, and the creature took its first breath. I had done it. I had created life. But my triumph was short-lived. As the creature came to life, I realized the horror of what I had done. The being before me was monstrous. Its yellow skin barely covered its muscles and veins. Its eyes were watery and lifeless, and its face was twisted in an expression of confusion and pain. I was overcome with fear and disgust. I fled from the laboratory, leaving the creature behind. I ran through the streets of Ingolstadt, my heart pounding in my chest. I could not face what I had created. I had played with the forces of nature, and the result was a living nightmare. In the days that followed, I fell into a deep illness. My body was weak, and my mind was tormented by nightmares. I isolated myself in my room, unable to eat or sleep. My friend Henry Clerval, who had come to study at the university, found me in this state. He took care of me, nursing me back to health with great patience and kindness. As I recovered, I tried to put the creature out of my mind. I focused on my studies and tried to return to a normal life. But the guilt and fear never left me. I knew that the creature was out there somewhere, and I dreaded what it might do. One day, I received a letter from my father. It brought terrible news. My youngest brother, William, had been found dead. The news shocked me to my core. I feared that the creature was responsible for his death. I decided to return to Geneva to be with my family and find out the truth. The journey home was filled with anxiety. I could not stop thinking about the creature and the possible consequences of my actions. When I arrived in Geneva, my family welcomed me with open arms. But the joy of being home was overshadowed by the tragedy that had struck us. I learned that a beloved family servant, Justine, had been accused of William's murder. She had been found with a locket that belonged to William, and the evidence against her seemed overwhelming. But I knew in my heart that she was innocent. The true culprit was the creature I had brought to life. Despite my suspicions, I could not bring myself to confess the truth. I feared that no one would believe me, and I could not bear the shame of revealing my terrible secret. Justine was tried and found guilty. She was sentenced to death, and I watched helplessly as she was executed for a crime she did not commit. The guilt and sorrow weighed heavily on me. I realized that I had to take responsibility for my actions. The creature was my creation, and it was my duty to find it and stop it from causing more harm. With a heavy heart and a determined spirit, I set out on a journey to track down the being I had brought to life. As I traveled through the countryside, I reflected on my pursuit of knowledge and the terrible price I had paid. I had sought to unlock the secrets of life, but in doing so, I had unleashed a monster. My ambition and obsession had blinded me to the potential consequences of my actions. Now, I had to face the consequences and make things right. My journey was long and difficult. I followed clues and rumors, always one step behind the creature. I traveled through forests and mountains, driven by a relentless determination. I knew that I could not rest until I had found the creature and put an end to its reign of terror. Chapter 3. Creation of the Monster. I spent months working tirelessly in my laboratory. The idea of creating life consumed me. Day and night, I studied anatomy, chemistry, and the principles of life. I collected materials from various sources, piecing together parts to form a human body. My obsession grew stronger with each passing day, and I isolated myself from the world. My goal was clear. I wanted to create a living being. The process was complex and required immense dedication. I used my knowledge of electricity and chemistry to animate lifeless matter. I worked with delicate precision, stitching together veins, muscles, and skin. Each step was a mix of hope and fear. I knew I was venturing into unknown territory, but my curiosity pushed me forward. One stormy night, everything was ready. The body lay on the table, connected to wires and electrodes. I had prepared for this moment with great care. The sky outside was dark, and thunder rumbled in the distance. I felt a sense of anticipation and dread as I waited for the storm to reach its peak. As the lightning flashed and the thunder roared, I activated my equipment. The room filled with the crackling sound of electricity. The body on the table began to twitch and move. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the lifeless form come to life. The fingers curled, the eyes opened, and the creature took its first breath. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of triumph. I had done it. I had created life. But as the creature's eyes focused on me, my joy turned to horror. The being before me was monstrous. Its yellow skin barely covered its muscles and veins. Its eyes were watery and lifeless, and its face was twisted in an expression of confusion and pain. It was a sight too terrible to behold. I stumbled backward, unable to process what I had done. The creature reached out its hand, trying to communicate, but I was too terrified to respond. I fled from the laboratory, leaving the creature behind. I ran through the dark, empty streets, my mind racing with fear and regret. I found refuge in my room, but I could not escape the images that haunted me. The monstrous face, the lifeless eyes, the outstretched hand. They were burned into my memory. I had played with the forces of nature, and the result was a living nightmare. I felt a deep sense of guilt and shame. I had created a being that should not exist. The days that followed were a blur. I fell into a deep illness, both physically and mentally. My body was weak, and my mind was tormented by nightmares. I could not eat or sleep. My friend Henry Clerval found me in this state and took care of me. He was a true friend, and I owed my recovery to his kindness and patience. As I slowly regained my strength, I tried to put the creature out of my mind. I focused on my studies and attempted to return to a normal life. But the guilt and fear never left me. I knew that the creature was out there, somewhere, and I dreaded what it might do. I had unleashed something terrible into the world, and it was my responsibility to stop it. One day, I received a letter from my father. It brought terrible news. My youngest brother, William, had been found dead. The news shocked me to my core. I feared that the creature was responsible for his death. I decided to return to Geneva to be with my family and find out the truth. The journey home was filled with anxiety. I could not stop thinking about the creature and the possible consequences of my actions. When I arrived in Geneva, my family welcomed me with open arms. But the joy of being home was overshadowed by the tragedy that had struck us. I learned that a beloved family servant, Justine, had been accused of William's murder. She had been found with a locket that belonged to William, and the evidence against her seemed overwhelming. But I knew in my heart that she was innocent. The true culprit was the creature I had brought to life. Despite my suspicions, I could not bring myself to confess the truth. I feared that no one would believe me, and I could not bear the shame of revealing my terrible secret. Justine was tried and found guilty. She was sentenced to death, and I watched helplessly as she was executed for a crime she did not commit. The guilt and sorrow weighed heavily on me. I realized that I had to take responsibility for my actions. The creature was my creation, and it was my duty to find it and stop it from causing more harm. With a heavy heart and a determined spirit, I set out on a journey to track down the being I had brought to life. As I traveled through the countryside, I reflected on my pursuit of knowledge and the terrible price I had paid. I had sought to unlock the secrets of life, but in doing so, I had unleashed a monster. My ambition and obsession had blinded me to the potential consequences of my actions. Now, I had to face the consequences and make things right. My journey was long and difficult. I followed clues and rumors, always one step behind the creature. I traveled through forests and mountains, driven by a relentless determination. I knew that I could not rest until I had found the creature and put an end to its reign of terror. Chapter 4. The Monster's Escape. After the horrific night when I brought the creature to life, my mind was in turmoil. I spent the next few days in a state of shock and confusion. My body grew weak, and I fell into a deep illness. Henry Clerval, my loyal friend, found me in this state and took me to his rooms. He cared for me with great patience and kindness. For weeks, I drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by nightmares of the monster I had created. While I lay ill, the creature experienced the world for the first time. It had no guidance, no understanding of its existence. It wandered through the streets of Ingolstadt, confused and frightened. People who saw it reacted with fear and hostility. The monster, with its ghastly appearance, could not find kindness or acceptance. Driven by hunger and pain, the creature fled from the city and into the countryside. It found refuge in the forest, where it learned to survive on its own. The forest was both beautiful and harsh. The monster had to learn quickly. It discovered how to find food and shelter, but it also felt the cold and hunger deeply. One day the monster came across a small village. It watched from the shadows as people went about their lives. It saw families laughing, children playing, and the warmth of human connection. This sight filled the creature with longing and sadness. It realized how different it was from these happy people, and it felt a deep sense of loneliness. In my state of illness, I knew nothing of the creature's experiences. I only knew the horror of what I had done. Slowly, with Henry's help, I began to recover. He brought me news from the university, read to me, and did everything he could to lift my spirits. His presence was a great comfort, and I felt my strength returning. When I was finally well enough to leave my bed, Henry took me for walks in the fresh air. The beauty of nature helped to clear my mind. The green fields, the blue sky, and the sound of birds singing brought me a sense of peace. Yet a shadow still hung over me. I could not forget the creature, and I feared what it might be doing. Meanwhile, the monster continued to learn about the world. It found a small cottage in the forest and began to observe the family living there. There was a father, a son, and a daughter. They were kind and loving to each other, and the monster watched them with great interest. It learned about human behavior and emotions by watching this family. The monster also began to understand language. It listened to the family's conversations and tried to imitate their words. Slowly it began to speak, practicing the sounds it heard. It discovered the names of things and learned to express its own thoughts and feelings. This was a time of great discovery for the creature, but also a time of great pain. It understood more about its own isolation and ugliness. As I recovered, I received a letter from my father. It was filled with concern and love, urging me to return home to Geneva. My family missed me, and they wanted to see me well again. I decided to leave Ingolstadt and go back to my family. The thought of seeing them brought me joy, but also fear. I dreaded what they might think of me if they knew the truth. Before I left, I visited my laboratory one last time. The place was filled with the memories of my terrible experiment. I gathered my notes and destroyed them. I wanted to erase all evidence of my work. I hoped that by leaving Ingolstadt, I could also leave behind the horror of what I had done. The journey back to Geneva was long and filled with mixed emotions. I was eager to see my family, but I could not escape the feeling of dread. What if the creature followed me? What if it brought more misery to my loved ones? When I arrived home, my family welcomed me with open arms. Their love and care helped to heal my wounded spirit. My father, my brothers, and dear Elizabeth were all there. They were happy to see me and did their best to make me forget the darkness that had overshadowed my life. For a time, I felt almost normal. The beauty of Geneva, the warmth of my family, and the simple joys of daily life brought me peace. But the memory of the creature never left me. I knew it was out there, somewhere, and I feared what it might do next. The monster, meanwhile, continued its lonely journey. It tried to approach the family it had been watching, hoping for kindness and acceptance. But when it revealed itself, the family reacted with fear and horror. They drove it away, and the creature was left more alone than ever. The rejection filled the monster with rage and sorrow. It realized that it could never find a place among humans. The creature disappeared into the wilderness, filled with a burning desire for revenge against the one who had created it, and condemned it to this life of misery. As I spent time with my family, I could not shake the feeling of impending doom. I knew that my creation was out there, filled with anger and suffering. I had brought a terrible being into the world, and I feared the consequences of my actions. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and this is my story. Chapter 5. The Monster's First Encounters. After escaping from the laboratory, the monster found itself alone in the dark streets of Ingolstadt. It did not understand its own existence. The cold night air chilled its body, and the empty streets felt both freeing and frightening. As dawn approached, the monster stumbled into the countryside, seeking refuge from the world that had already shown it fear and rejection. The forest became the monster's first home. It learned to survive by observing the animals around it. The monster drank from clear streams and ate wild berries. It built a small shelter from branches and leaves. The forest, while harsh, provided some peace and a place to hide. The monster's first encounter with humans was by accident. It had wandered too close to a small village. Curious about the lights and sounds, it approached a cottage. Inside, a family was sitting around a table, laughing and talking. The warmth and happiness inside the cottage were a stark contrast to the monster's cold and lonely existence. As it peered through the window, longing to be a part of this warmth, it accidentally knocked over a pile of wood. The noise alerted the family. They rushed to the window and saw the creature. Their faces twisted in horror. The father shouted, and the children screamed. The monster, confused and scared, tried to speak, but its words came out as strange sounds. The family's fear turned to anger, and they drove the monster away with sticks and stones. The monster fled back into the forest, wounded and heartbroken. It did not understand why people reacted with such fear and hatred. The rejection stung deeply. The monster looked at its reflection in a pool of water. For the first time it saw its own face clearly. The yellow eyes, the rough, patchy skin, and the twisted features filled it with despair. It realized that it was hideous, a monster in the eyes of humans. Days turned into weeks as the monster wandered the forest, avoiding humans. It learned more about survival, finding food and shelter. Yet it could not escape the loneliness that gnawed at its soul. It craved companionship and understanding, but every encounter with humans ended in rejection and fear. One day, the monster came across a group of villagers in the forest. They were gathering firewood and talking loudly. The monster stayed hidden, watching them. But one of the villagers noticed the movement in the bushes. He approached cautiously, his face showing curiosity mixed with fear. When he saw the creature, he shouted for help. The other villagers rushed over, armed with tools and sticks. The monster tried to speak, to show that it meant no harm, but the villagers would not listen. They attacked it, beating it with whatever they had. The monster, despite its strength, did not fight back. It only wanted to be understood. But all it received was pain. Wounded and in pain, the monster escaped deeper into the forest. It found a cave and collapsed inside, its body aching from the injuries. It felt an overwhelming sense of despair. It began to understand that it was different, a creature that would never be accepted by humans. The loneliness was a heavy burden. The monster spent the following months in isolation, healing its wounds and learning more about the world from afar. It observed a family living in a small cottage on the edge of the forest. The family consisted of a blind old man, his son, and his daughter. The monster watched them from a distance, fascinated by their kindness and love for each other. Through these observations, the monster learned about human behavior and emotions. It listened to their conversations and learned to understand and speak their language. The monster longed to be a part of this family, to experience the warmth and acceptance it saw every day. One evening, when the family was inside, the monster gathered the courage to approach the blind old man. It knew the old man could not see its hideous form. As it entered the cottage, it spoke gently, introducing itself. The old man, hearing the sincerity in the monster's voice, welcomed the visitor. They talked for hours, sharing stories and thoughts. The monster felt a sense of joy and relief. However, this moment of peace did not last. The old man's son and daughter returned home and found the monster with their father. Their reaction was immediate and violent. They screamed and attacked the monster, thinking it was harming their father. The old man tried to explain, but his words were drowned out by the chaos. The monster, heartbroken once again, fled from the cottage. It ran through the forest, its mind filled with sorrow and anger. The rejection from the family it had come to care for was the final blow. It realized that no matter how much it tried, it would never be accepted by humans. As the days passed, the monster's sorrow turned to rage. It understood that it was alone in the world, a being without a place. It directed its anger towards me, its creator. I had brought it into existence and abandoned it to a life of misery. The monster vowed to find me and make me suffer for the pain it had endured. In the quiet moments, when the rage subsided, the monster still felt the deep ache of loneliness. It wandered the world, seeking answers and trying to understand its place. It knew that its journey was far from over, and that the path ahead would be filled with challenges. As I spent time with my family in Geneva, unaware of the creature's suffering, I could not shake the feeling of impending doom. The monster I had created was out there, somewhere, and I knew that our paths would cross again. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and this is my story. Chapter 6. The monster learns to communicate. The forest had become my refuge. I had escaped the cruel villagers and found a safe place to hide. Deep within the trees, I discovered a small cottage. It was home to a family who fascinated me from the moment I saw them. There was an old blind man, his son, and his daughter. They lived simply, but there was a warmth and love between them that I longed to understand. Each day I watched the family from a distance. I hid in a small hovel nearby, close enough to observe but far enough to remain unseen. The cottage was my window into human life. I watched them cook, work, and care for each other. I listened to their conversations, trying to make sense of the words they spoke. Their language was strange to me, but I was determined to learn. The old man, De Lacy, often played his guitar and sang softly. His music was beautiful, and I felt a deep connection to his songs, even though I could not understand the words. Felix, his son, worked hard in the fields, and his sister, Agatha, tended to the house and the garden. They were poor, but they were happy together. Their laughter and kindness touched my heart. At night, when the family slept, I would creep closer to the cottage. I found books that Felix had left outside and took them back to my hovel. By the light of the moon, I studied these books, trying to decipher their meaning. It was a slow and difficult process, but I was determined. I wanted to understand their words and be a part of their world. As weeks passed, I began to learn their language. I listened carefully to their conversations and repeated the words to myself. I practiced speaking in whispers, imitating their tones and expressions. Slowly, I started to understand the meaning of the words and how they connected to the actions and emotions I observed. One day, I found a book in the forest. It was old and worn, but I was thrilled. The book was Paradise Lost by John Milton. I could not read every word, but I grasped the story of creation, rebellion, and loss. I saw parallels between the characters in the book and my own existence. I felt like Adam, created and abandoned, but also like Satan, filled with rage and sorrow. As I learned more, I felt a growing desire for companionship. Watching the de Lacy family, I yearned for the same love and acceptance they shared. I wanted to speak with them, to be a part of their lives. I imagined myself sitting by the fire, sharing stories and laughter, but I also knew my appearance would frighten them. I had seen how humans reacted to me, and I feared their rejection. Despite my fears, I decided to try. I could no longer bear the loneliness. I planned my approach carefully. I would wait until the old man was alone. Since he was blind, he would not judge me by my appearance. I hoped to earn his trust, and then, through him, gain acceptance from the rest of the family. The opportunity came one afternoon when Felix and Agatha went to the village. I watched them leave and waited until de Lacy was alone. My heart pounded with fear and excitement as I approached the cottage. I knocked gently on the door, and the old man invited me in. His voice was kind, and he welcomed me warmly. "Who is there?" de Lacy asked. "A traveller," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I seek shelter and rest." "You are welcome here," he said. "Come, sit by the fire and tell me your story." I sat down, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The warmth of the fire was comforting, and I took a deep breath. I told de Lacy about my life, carefully choosing my words. I spoke of my longing for companionship and my fear of rejection. The old man listened patiently, nodding and offering kind words. "You are not alone," he said gently. "Everyone needs friends and family. We all seek love and understanding." His words gave me hope. I felt a bond forming between us. For the first time, I felt understood and accepted. I wanted to tell him everything, to reveal my true nature. But I hesitated. I feared that even his kindness could not overcome the horror of my appearance. As we talked, I heard footsteps approaching. Felix and Agatha were returning. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to leave before they saw me. I stood up quickly, thanking de Lacy for his kindness. "Please, do not leave," he said, sensing my distress. "Stay and rest." But it was too late. The door opened, and Felix and Agatha entered. Their eyes widened in shock and fear when they saw me. Felix grabbed a stick and rushed towards me, shouting for me to leave. Agatha screamed, and de Lacy tried to calm them. But the damage was done. I fled from the cottage, my heart breaking with each step. The rejection I had feared had become a reality. I ran through the forest, tears streaming down my face. The family that I had come to love and admire had turned me away, just like all the others. As night fell, I found myself back in my hovel, filled with despair. The dream of companionship and acceptance seemed further away than ever. I realized that I would always be an outcast, feared and hated by those I longed to be with. The sorrow turned to anger, and I vowed to find my creator, Victor Frankenstein, and demand answers. He had brought me into this world, and he would answer for my suffering. My journey of learning and longing had only deepened my sense of isolation. I had tasted the possibility of connection, only to have it ripped away. Now, my desire for companionship was overshadowed by a burning need for justice and revenge. Chapter 7. The Monster's Request. After many months of solitude and suffering, the longing for companionship and revenge led me, the creature, back to Victor Frankenstein, my creator. The journey to find him was arduous and filled with obstacles. but the burning need to confront him and demand justice drove me forward. When I finally found Victor, he was in the mountains, seeking solace in the beauty of nature, trying to escape the guilt that haunted him. I approached him quietly, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and desperation. The sight of me startled Victor. His eyes widened in shock, and his face turned pale. I could see the fear in his eyes, but there was also a flicker of recognition, of responsibility. "Victor," I began, my voice stronger than I had anticipated. "You created me, and yet you abandoned me to a world that shuns me as a monster. Look at the misery I have endured, the solitude that poisons my heart. I am alone, and it is unbearable." Victor stared at me, a storm of emotions crossing his face. After a moment of tense silence, he spoke. "I see the pain I have caused, and I regret the suffering you have endured. But what you ask of me now, I fear it could lead to greater horrors." I knew this was the moment to make my plea, the request that had formed during my lonely nights. "I ask for a companion," I said. "Someone like me, so that I might not be alone anymore. You owe me this much, Victor. You owe me happiness, or at least the peace that comes from not being utterly alone." Victor looked away, his expression tormented. He wandered a few steps, grappling with his thoughts. The mountains around us stood silent and imposing, witnesses to our fateful confrontation. "Creating another like you, it could lead to catastrophe. What if your companion rejects the world as you have? What if she becomes a greater monster, refuses to hide, and brings down wrath upon us all?" Victor's voice trembled as he presented his fears. I felt a surge of anger, but managed to keep my voice steady. "I am not a monster by choice, but by your design and the world's rejection. Grant me this one request, and I promise we will disappear into the wilderness, away from human eyes. We will harm no one." Victor paced back and forth, his hands clenched. The struggle was evident in his eyes. Finally, he stopped and faced me, his decision clear. "I will do as you ask," he said slowly. "I will create a companion for you, but you must promise to leave humanity alone and never seek revenge." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. "I promise," I replied. "Once I am not alone, I will have no reason for vengeance." Victor took a deep breath, as if steeling himself against doubts. "I will need time to prepare. Go now, and wait for me in the north. I will come to you when I am ready." His voice was resigned, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. I left Victor standing alone on the mountain, the burden of our agreement heavy on both our shoulders. As I retreated into the shadows, I felt a glimmer of hope. The possibility of companionship, of not facing every day alone, gave me the strength to continue. Victor, meanwhile, returned to his lab with a heavy heart. The thought of repeating his grim work filled him with dread. But he felt bound by his promise and his sense of responsibility towards the creature he had brought into existence. The process of creating life was fraught with moral and ethical questions, but Victor knew that he could not ignore the creature's suffering. As he gathered the necessary materials and prepared for the task ahead, Victor was tormented by doubts. What if he was about to make a grave mistake? What if the creation of another creature brought about more tragedy? But he had given his word, and he felt compelled to alleviate the loneliness of the being he had created. Victor worked for months, each step reminding him of that dreadful night when he first brought the creature to life. The memory of his initial success and subsequent horror was fresh in his mind as he assembled the body of the new creature. The looming fear of what he was about to do weighed heavily on him, but he pushed forward, driven by the promise he had made. Meanwhile, I waited in the north, the cold and solitude my only companions. Each day I grew more anxious, wondering if Victor would fulfill his promise. The hope of a companion kept me tethered to a thread of patience. I knew that my future, whatever it might hold, depended on Victor's actions. In time, Victor completed his work. With a heart full of apprehension, he travelled north to meet me. The weight of our agreement and the potential consequences of his actions hung between us. Chapter 8. The Creation of the Female Monster. With a heavy heart, I prepared for the task ahead. Creating the female monster weighed on my mind, filling me with dread. Yet I had given my word, and I felt bound to honor it. The process was familiar, but no less gruesome. I collected materials and equipment, each piece reminding me of the horror I had unleashed before. The memory of that dreadful night haunted my every step. Once my preparations were complete, I set out for a remote location far from human eyes. I chose a desolate island off the coast of Scotland. Its isolation would allow me to work without interruption and, if necessary, contain any danger. The journey to the island was long and arduous, but the thought of completing this task and ending my torment drove me forward. As I travelled, the landscape grew more barren and hostile. The sea was rough, and the skies were dark with clouds. The island itself was a bleak and desolate place, with rocky shores and howling winds. It seemed fitting, given the nature of my work. I found a small abandoned hut near the shore and made it my laboratory. Inside the hut, I set up my equipment and began the grim task of creating the female monster. Each step of the process filled me with fear and doubt. I stitched together the pieces, working late into the night by the light of a flickering candle. The shadows danced on the walls, mirroring the turmoil within me. As the days passed, my progress was steady but slow. The isolation of the island weighed heavily on my mind, and I felt a growing sense of dread. The thought of bringing another creature into the world, another being that could suffer as the first had, filled me with guilt. Yet I pressed on, driven by my promise to the monster. One stormy night, as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, I approached the final stages of my work. The female monster lay on the table before me, lifeless but nearly complete. My hands trembled as I connected the final wires, preparing to harness the power of the storm to bring her to life. As I stood there, poised to complete my work, a sudden realization struck me. What if this creature turned out like the first? What if she became a source of even greater misery and destruction? The thought of creating another monster, another being capable of wreaking havoc on the world, filled me with horror. I knew I could not go through with it. In a moment of clarity, I made my decision. I could not bring this new creature to life. With a sense of finality, I began to dismantle my work. I cut the wires, removed the equipment, and destroyed the materials I had used. The lifeless form on the table would never awaken. The storm outside raged on, but inside the hut, a calm settled over me. I felt a sense of relief, knowing I had chosen not to repeat my past mistakes. As I stood there, breathing heavily from the exertion, the door to the hut burst open. The monster, my first creation, stood in the doorway, his eyes filled with rage and betrayal. He had followed me to the island, watching my progress from the shadows. Now he saw what I had done, and his fury was palpable. "You promised!" he roared, his voice echoing over the howling wind. "You said you would create a companion for me, someone to end my loneliness. And now you destroy her?" I faced him, my heart pounding with fear, but my resolve firm. "I could not do it," I replied. "I realized the potential for harm, the suffering another creature might cause. I could not bring myself to repeat the same mistake." The monster's eyes blazed with anger, and he advanced towards me. "You have condemned me to a life of loneliness and misery," he snarled. "I will make you suffer as I have suffered. I will destroy everything you hold dear." With that, he turned and fled into the stormy night, leaving me alone in the ruined hut. The wind howled, and the rain lashed against the walls, but I felt a strange sense of peace. I had made my choice, and I would face the consequences. The journey back from the island was even more difficult than the journey there. The weight of what had transpired hung heavily on me. I knew the monster's threat was real, and I feared for my loved ones. Yet I also felt a sense of resolution. I had chosen not to unleash another horror upon the world, and I stood by that decision. When I returned to the mainland, I sought out my friend Henry Clerval. His presence was a comfort, and I shared my ordeal with him. He listened with understanding and offered his support. Together, we made our way back to Geneva, where I hoped to find some measure of peace. As we travelled, the landscape changed from the bleak and desolate island to the familiar and comforting surroundings of home. Yet, I knew that the monster was still out there, somewhere, filled with rage and a desire for revenge. I could not escape the shadow of my creation, and I would have to face whatever came next. Chapter 9. Revenge of the Monster. After the stormy night on the island, I returned to Geneva with a heavy heart. I knew that my decision to destroy the female creature would have consequences, and I feared what the monster might do. My friend Henry Clerval travelled with me, providing comfort and support. His presence was a balm to my troubled soul, but a dark shadow still loomed over me. We arrived in Geneva, and for a brief time I felt a sense of peace. Being home with my family and Elizabeth gave me moments of joy, but the fear of the monster's revenge never left my mind. I tried to distract myself with work and family, but the unease grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace with Elizabeth, a sense of dread washed over me. The monster's words echoed in my mind. "I will make you suffer as I have suffered." I knew that he was out there, somewhere, plotting his revenge. My heart ached with the weight of my decisions, and I could not shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. A few days later, my worst fears came true. I received a letter from the local authorities. The letter stated that my dear friend Henry Clerval had been found dead. The news hit me like a thunderbolt. Henry, who had been my constant companion and support, was gone. I felt a deep, aching sorrow that threatened to overwhelm me. I rushed to the scene, hoping against hope that the letter was a mistake. But when I arrived, the reality of Henry's death was undeniable. He had been found by the river, his body lifeless and cold. The authorities could not determine the cause of death, but I knew the truth. This was the monster's doing. He had struck at my heart, taking away my closest friend. The grief and guilt were almost too much to bear. I had brought this horror into the world, and now it had taken the life of someone I loved. I returned home, filled with a deep sense of loss. My family and Elizabeth tried to comfort me, but their words could not ease the pain in my heart. I knew that the monster would not stop until he had destroyed everything I held dear. A few nights later, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I heard a noise outside my window. I got up and looked out, my heart pounding with fear. There, in the darkness, I saw the monster. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his expression was filled with anger and sorrow. "Victor!" he called, his voice carrying through the night air. "You have broken your promise. You have condemned me to a life of loneliness and despair. Now I will make you suffer as I have suffered." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I want you to feel the pain of loss," the monster replied. "I want you to know what it is like to be alone in the world, to have everything you love taken away." The monster's words filled me with a deep sense of dread. I knew that he would stop at nothing to achieve his revenge. "Please," I pleaded, "do not harm my family. They are innocent in all of this." The monster's eyes narrowed. "Your family will suffer because of your actions," he said. "You created me, and now you must face the consequences." With that, the monster disappeared into the night, leaving me standing by the window, filled with fear and despair. I knew that I had to protect my loved ones, but I felt powerless against the creature I had brought into the world. The next morning, I gathered my family and told them everything. I explained the terrible truth about the monster and the danger we faced. They listened with a mix of shock and disbelief, but they understood the seriousness of the situation. We made plans to leave Geneva and find a safe place where we could stay hidden from the monster's wrath. We traveled to a remote village in the mountains, hoping to escape the monster's reach. The journey was difficult, but we were determined to stay together and protect each other. The village was peaceful and secluded, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. For a time, it seemed as though we had found a safe haven. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as we sat together in the small cottage we had rented, a sense of foreboding filled the air. The wind howled outside, and the shadows seemed to grow darker. I knew that the monster was near. I could feel his presence, a cold and menacing force that threatened to shatter our fragile peace. I went outside, hoping to confront the monster and reason with him one last time. As I stood in the darkness, the monster emerged from the shadows. His eyes were filled with anger and pain, and I knew that words would not be enough to stop him. "You cannot escape me, Victor," he said, his voice filled with bitterness. "I will find you, no matter where you go, and I will make you suffer for what you have done." "I beg you," I said, my voice shaking. "Leave my family out of this. They have done nothing to deserve your wrath." The monster's expression softened for a moment, but then hardened again. "It is too late for that," he said. "You made your choice, and now you must live with the consequences." With those words, the monster turned and disappeared into the night, leaving me standing alone in the cold. I knew that the struggle was far from over, and that the monster would continue to haunt me and my loved ones. But I also knew that I had to fight, to protect those I cared about, no matter the cost. Chapter 10. Tragedy Strikes. The days passed in a tense quiet as we stayed in the remote village, hoping to avoid the monster's wrath. My fiancée, Elizabeth, was my greatest source of comfort. Her presence gave me strength, but also a deep sense of fear. I dreaded what might happen to her, knowing the monster's promise of revenge. Despite my fears, We decided to marry. We hoped that our union would bring some measure of happiness amidst the darkness. The day of our wedding was bittersweet. We exchanged vows in a small chapel, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the warmth of our family. For a moment I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that perhaps we could find peace. But as the sun set and the shadows grew long, my sense of foreboding returned. I could not shake the feeling that the monster was near. That night, after the celebrations, Elizabeth and I retired to our room. The cottage was quiet, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. As we sat together, I tried to push away my fears and focus on the joy of our union. Elizabeth's smile was a balm to my troubled soul, and I held her close, whispering words of love and reassurance. But the peace was shattered in an instant. A sudden crash echoed through the cottage, and the door burst open. The monster stood in the doorway, his eyes filled with rage and sorrow. Before I could react, he lunged at Elizabeth. The room filled with her screams, and I was frozen in horror. By the time I moved to stop him, it was too late. The monster had taken her life, leaving her lifeless body in his wake. Grief and rage consumed me. I felt as though my heart had been torn from my chest. Elizabeth, my beloved, was gone. The monster had fulfilled his promise of revenge, and I was left alone in a world that had turned cold and dark. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it burned a fierce determination. I swore to hunt down the monster and end his reign of terror. I buried Elizabeth in the village, the sadness overwhelming me. But I knew I could not linger. I had to act. Driven by anger and sorrow, I set out to find the monster. I followed his trail, moving through forests and mountains, always one step behind. The pursuit was exhausting, but I could not rest. The memory of Elizabeth's death fueled my every step. The monster seemed to be leading me further north, into a landscape that grew more desolate and frozen with each passing day. The air turned colder, and the ground was covered in snow and ice. I pushed on, driven by a single purpose. The monster had to be stopped, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks as I continued my pursuit. The harsh conditions took their toll on my body, but my determination never wavered. I followed the monster across frozen rivers and through blizzards, the icy wind cutting through my clothes and chilling me to the bone. The landscape was a stark and unforgiving place, a fitting backdrop for the final act of our tragic tale. One night, as the moon cast a pale light over the frozen wasteland, I caught sight of the monster in the distance. He moved with a determined purpose, always just out of reach. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The chase was nearing its end, and I knew that a final confrontation was inevitable. The monster led me to a vast frozen lake. The ice stretched out before us, a glittering expanse of white under the moonlight. I could see the monster clearly now, his figure dark against the snow. I called out to him, my voice echoing across the ice. "Monster!" I shouted, my voice filled with fury and pain. "Face me! End this torment!" The monster turned to face me, his eyes reflecting the sorrow and anger that mirrored my own. "You have come, as I knew you would," he said, his voice carrying over the frozen expanse. "This is where it ends, Victor." We stood facing each other, two figures locked in a tragic dance. The ice beneath our feet creaked and groaned, the cold seeping into our bones. The monster's eyes bore into mine, and I saw in them a reflection of my own pain and loss. He had suffered as I had, and in that moment I realized the depth of the tragedy that had unfolded between us. I never asked to be brought into this world, the monster said, his voice heavy with sorrow. You gave me life, but you gave me no place in it. I am a creature of misery, and so I have brought misery upon you. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, sorrow, regret. I wanted to create something beautiful, I replied, my voice trembling. But I failed. I failed you, and I failed those I loved. The monster looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and understanding. Perhaps we are both victims of the same fate, he said quietly. But this ends now. With those words, the ice beneath us cracked. The sound was like thunder, and the ground gave way. I stumbled, struggling to keep my footing, but the monster moved with a swift, decisive grace. He vanished into the darkness, leaving me alone on the collapsing ice. I fought to stay above the frigid water, my limbs heavy with exhaustion and cold. The frozen landscape seemed to close in around me, the darkness swallowing the light. I thought of Elizabeth, of Henry, and all that had been lost. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, a burden too great to bear. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, a final thought filled my mind. I had created a monster, but I had also created my own doom. The chase, the pain, the loss, it was all part of the same tragic tale. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and this is my story. Chapter 11. The Arctic Pursuit. The Arctic is a place of ice and snow, a vast and frozen wilderness. The cold is relentless, biting through even the thickest of clothes. This is where I found myself, chasing the monster across the frozen landscape. The wind howled, carrying with it a chill that seemed to freeze my very soul. But I was driven by a fierce determination. I would not rest until I had confronted the creature I had brought into this world. Each day was a battle against the elements. The snow was deep, and the ice was treacherous. I trudged forward, my steps slow and heavy. The cold air burned my lungs, and my limbs ached with fatigue. But the image of Elizabeth, lifeless and still, pushed me onward. I could not let the monster escape. I had to end this. I followed the monster's tracks, sometimes losing them in the blinding snow. The Arctic was a desolate place, with no signs of life, only endless white. The sun barely rose above the horizon, casting a pale light over the frozen ground. Nights were long and dark, filled with the sound of the wind and the cracking ice. Despite the harsh conditions, my resolve never wavered. I thought of all that had been lost, my friend Henry, my beloved Elizabeth. Their faces haunted my dreams, and their memory fueled my pursuit. I had created the monster, and it was my responsibility to stop him. One night, as I lay in my makeshift shelter, I heard a distant sound. It was a low, mournful cry, carried on the wind. I knew it was the monster. He was close. I gathered my strength and set out into the night, following the sound across the ice. The landscape was a blur of white and shadows, the moon casting an eerie glow over the snow. The cold was intense, each breath a struggle. But I pressed on, driven by a determination that burned hotter than the Arctic chill. The cry grew louder, guiding me through the darkness. Finally, I saw him. The monster stood on a ridge of ice, his figure dark against the pale moonlight. He turned to face me, his eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. I approached him, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. "Victor!" the monster said, his voice echoing across the frozen wasteland. "You have followed me to the ends of the earth. Why do you persist?" "You know why," I replied, my voice steady despite the cold. "This must end. You have taken everything from me. I cannot allow you to cause more suffering." The monster's expression was a mix of sorrow and defiance. "I never wanted this," he said. "I only wanted companionship, acceptance. But you denied me that, and now we are both doomed to this fate." We stood facing each other, two figures locked in a tragic dance. The wind howled around us, the ice beneath our feet creaking and groaning. I felt a deep sense of sorrow, but also a fierce resolve. This was the final confrontation. It had to be. With a sudden movement, the monster lunged at me. We grappled, our struggle fierce and desperate. The ice cracked and shifted beneath us, threatening to give way. I fought with all my strength, driven by a determination to end this nightmare. The monster was strong, but so was I. We were evenly matched, each driven by our own pain and fury. The fight seemed to go on forever, each moment a battle for survival. The cold bit into my skin, but I barely felt it, my focus entirely on the creature before me. At last, I managed to gain the upper hand. I pushed the monster back, and he stumbled, falling to the ground. I stood over him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The monster looked up at me, his eyes filled with a strange mix of defiance and resignation. "End it, Victor," he said quietly. "End this torment for both of us." I hesitated, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. But I knew what had to be done. With a final surge of determination, I raised my weapon. The ice beneath us cracked and shifted, and I struck. The monster let out a cry, a sound filled with both pain and relief. The ice gave way beneath him, and he disappeared into the freezing water below. I watched as the cold, dark water swallowed him, my heart heavy with a mix of sorrow and grim satisfaction. The wind howled around me, and the Arctic night seemed to close in. I had done what I set out to do, but the victory felt hollow. The monster was gone, but the pain and loss remained. I had created this tragedy, and I would have to live with the consequences. As I stood alone on the ice, the cold seeping into my bones, I felt a strange sense of peace. The nightmare was over, but the scars would never fade. I had faced my creation, and in doing so, I had faced my own demons. The Arctic wind howled, and I turned to make my way back across the frozen landscape. Chapter 12. Victor's Reflection. As I lay in the small cabin of the ship, the icy waters of the Arctic surrounding us, I felt the weight of my life pressing down on me. The pain and regret were almost too much to bear. I had chased the monster to the ends of the earth, and now, as my strength waned, I found myself reflecting on the choices I had made, and the sorrow they had brought. Captain Walton, the kind and curious man who had rescued me from the ice, sat beside me, listening intently. He had become a friend and confidant, eager to hear my story, and so, with my final breaths, I began to tell him everything. "Captain Walton," I started, my voice weak but determined, "my life has been a tale of ambition and tragedy. From a young age, I was fascinated by science. My quest for knowledge led me to study at the University of Ingolstadt, where I dreamed of unlocking the secrets of life itself." I paused, the memories flooding back with a sharp clarity. "I succeeded," I continued, "but my success was my downfall. I created a being, a creature, from lifeless matter. I thought I was doing something great, but I was blind to the consequences. When the creature came to life, I was horrified by its appearance and abandoned it. That was my first mistake." Captain Walton listened silently, his eyes filled with empathy. I took a deep breath and went on. "The creature, my creation, was left to fend for itself. It experienced only rejection and fear from the world. It learned to hate, and that hatred was directed at me, its creator. The deaths of my brother William, my friend Henry, and my beloved Elizabeth were all a result of my actions. Tears filled my eyes as I spoke of Elizabeth. She was the light of my life, and I failed to protect her. The monster took her from me on our wedding night. It was then that I knew I had to hunt it down, to end the suffering I had caused. The ship rocked gently, the sound of the ice cracking and the waves lapping against the hull, creating a somber backdrop to my tale. I chased the monster across the world, I said, through mountains, forests, and finally to this frozen wasteland. Each step was filled with pain and regret. I knew I had to stop it, but I also knew that nothing I did could undo the past. Captain Walton placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of support. In the end, I continued, I confronted the creature on a vast frozen lake. We fought, and I watched as it disappeared into the icy depths. But even with the monster gone, the weight of my guilt remains. I created this tragedy, and I will carry it with me to my grave. My voice grew weaker, and I struggled to continue. Captain Walton, I said, learn from my mistakes. Let my story be a warning. Ambition without consideration for the consequences can lead to unimaginable suffering. Cherish the people around you, and never lose sight of the impact your actions can have on others. I could feel my life slipping away, the cold seeping into my bones. My time is short, I whispered, but I hope that by sharing my story, I can find some measure of peace. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and this is my legacy, a tale of caution and regret. As my final moments approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. The pain and sorrow of my life began to fade, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I had faced my demons and shared my story. Now it was time to rest. Captain Walton stayed by my side until the end, his presence a comfort in my final moments. I closed my eyes, the sound of the Arctic wind mingling with the gentle creak of the ship. My thoughts turned to those I had loved and lost, and a single tear slid down my cheek. With my last breath, I whispered, "Forgive me." And then, the world faded to darkness. Chapter 13. The Monster's Farewell. As the cold Arctic winds howled outside the ship, Captain Walton sat by Victor's lifeless body, deep in thought. The tale he had heard was unlike anything he had ever imagined. He could hardly believe the horrors and tragedies Victor had endured. The crew was silent, their faces showing a mix of fear and sorrow. Suddenly, the door to the cabin creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Walton looked up, his heart pounding. The creature, the monster Victor had described, stood before him. Its eyes glowed with a sad, almost human light. Walton felt a shiver run down his spine, but he held his ground. The monster approached Victor's body and looked down at him with an expression of deep sorrow. "Victor Frankenstein," he murmured, "my creator, my tormentor, my only connection to this world." He turned to Walton, his voice filled with an unexpected gentleness. "I am the being Victor spoke of. I am the creature, the one who has caused so much pain." Walton watched in silence, his fear giving way to curiosity and empathy. The monster's eyes met his, and he saw not a beast, but a soul filled with anguish. "I did not choose this life," the monster continued. I was brought into this world, abandoned, and forced to learn about humanity through rejection and isolation. I was not born evil. I became what I am through suffering and despair. The monster's voice was filled with sadness. I sought revenge on Victor for creating me and leaving me to a life of misery. But in my quest for vengeance, I too have suffered. Each act of revenge only deepened my sorrow and loneliness. Now that Victor is gone, I am truly alone. Walton felt a deep sense of pity for the creature. "What will you do now?" he asked gently. The monster looked out the small window, the icy landscape reflecting in his eyes. "I have no place in this world," he said softly. "I have no purpose without Victor. My existence has been one of pain and isolation. I have decided to end my own life, to find peace in the only way I can." Walton's heart ached for the creature. "Is there no other way?" he asked, hoping for a glimmer of hope. The monster shook his head. "I have thought long and hard about this. There is no place for me among humans. They will never accept me, and I cannot bear the pain of rejection any longer. I will journey to the farthest reaches of the Arctic, where no one can find me. There I will build a funeral pyre and end my suffering. The ice and snow will be my grave, and I will finally find peace." Walton watched as the monster knelt beside Victor's body one last time. "I'm sorry, Victor," he whispered. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused you, and for the pain you caused me. Perhaps, in another life, we could have found a way to coexist, but now it is too late." The monster stood up and turned to leave. "Captain Walton," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "learn from our story. Understand the importance of compassion and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Do not let your quest for knowledge lead you down the same path of destruction." With those final words, the monster stepped out into the icy night. Walton watched him go, a sense of profound sadness settling over him. He knew he would never see the creature again, but he would always remember the lessons learned from Victor and his creation. The next morning, Walton gathered his crew and prepared to continue their journey. The ship was ready to navigate through the treacherous ice, but the story of Victor and the monster weighed heavily on everyone's minds. As they sailed away, Walton looked back at the vast, frozen landscape. Somewhere out there, the monster was seeking his final rest. Walton reflected on the tale he had heard, understanding the deep connections between creator and creation, ambition and responsibility, humanity and isolation. The monster's farewell had touched his heart, and he resolved to live with greater compassion and wisdom. The Arctic wind howled, carrying with it the echoes of a tragic story, a story that would remain with Walton for the rest of his life. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had witnessed something profound, a tale of sorrow and redemption, of loss and understanding. As the ship moved forward, Walton looked to the horizon, determined to honor the lessons he had learned. The journey was not just through the icy waters, but through the depths of human experience. And with each passing day, he carried the memory of Victor and the monster with him, a reminder of the fragile balance between creation and destruction, hope and despair. The ice cracked and shifted beneath the ship, but Walton felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would share the story with others, ensuring that the legacy of Victor Frankenstein and his creature would be remembered. And in doing so, he hoped to prevent others from making the same tragic mistakes. My name is Victor Frankenstein, and this is the end of my story. Chapter 14. Conclusion and Morals. After the monster's farewell, I felt a heavy weight on my heart. The Arctic wind howled outside the cabin, a constant reminder of the harsh and unforgiving world we were navigating. The story of Victor Frankenstein and his creation had left an indelible mark on me, and I knew it was time to return to the ship and share what I had learned. I made my way back to the ship, the icy landscape stretching out endlessly before me. My crew greeted me with concern, their faces etched with worry. They had seen the toll this journey had taken on me, and they were eager to leave this desolate place. I gathered them on the deck, the cold wind biting at our faces, and began to speak. "Men," I said, my voice steady despite the chill, "we have witnessed something extraordinary. The tale of Victor Frankenstein and his creation is not just a story of science and ambition. It is a story of humanity, of the consequences of our actions, and of the responsibilities we bear." The crew listened intently, their eyes fixed on me. I continued, "Victor's ambition led him to create life, but he did not consider the consequences. He brought a being into the world and then abandoned it, leaving it to face rejection and suffering. This neglect turned the creature into a source of misery and destruction. We must learn from his mistakes." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Ambition is not inherently wrong," I said, "but it must be tempered with responsibility and compassion. We must consider the impact of our actions on others and ensure that our pursuit of knowledge does not come at the expense of our humanity." As I spoke, I saw the understanding in my crew's eyes. They nodded in agreement, recognizing the importance of the lessons I was sharing. I felt a sense of purpose, knowing that Victor's story would not be forgotten. It would serve as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the delicate balance between ambition and responsibility. "We must also remember the creature," I continued. "He was not born a monster. He became one because of the way he was treated. We must strive to treat all beings with kindness and empathy, no matter how different they may seem. Isolation and rejection can lead to great pain, but compassion can heal even the deepest wounds." The crew's expressions softened, and I saw a renewed determination in their faces. They understood that our journey was not just about exploration, but also about understanding and growth. We had a duty to learn from the past and to use that knowledge to build a better future. With a final look at the icy horizon, I turned back to the ship. "Let us return home," I said. "We have seen enough of the Arctic's harsh beauty. It is time to bring Victor's story back with us and ensure that its lessons are remembered." The journey home was long and challenging, but the moral lessons from Victor's story gave us strength. As we sailed through treacherous waters and faced the relentless cold, we reflected on the importance of empathy, responsibility, and the impact of our actions. One evening, as we gathered around the ship's small fireplace, I shared more of Victor's story with the crew. "Victor was a man of great intelligence and ambition," I said, "but his downfall was his inability to foresee the consequences of his actions. He sought to conquer nature, but in doing so, he lost his own humanity. Let us strive to be better, to seek knowledge with wisdom, and to act with compassion." The crew nodded, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. They understood that Victor's story was a reminder of the potential dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of considering the ethical implications of our actions. As we continued our journey, I often found myself reflecting on the tale of Victor Frankenstein. His life had been filled with both triumph and tragedy, and his story was a powerful reminder of the complexities of the human condition. It was a lesson in the importance of humility and the need to balance our desires with a sense of moral responsibility. One night, as I stood on the deck, looking out at the vast expanse of the ocean, I thought about the creature. He had been brought into a world that rejected him, forced to endure a life of suffering and isolation. Yet in his final moments, he had shown a profound understanding of his own existence and the consequences of his actions. We must remember the creature's plea for compassion, I said to myself. His story is a reminder that every being, no matter how different, deserves kindness and empathy. We must strive to create a world where no one is left to suffer in isolation. As the weeks passed and we drew closer to home, I felt a sense of resolve. I knew that I would share Victor's story with the world, ensuring that its lessons would not be forgotten. It was a tale of ambition and regret, of creation and destruction, and most importantly, of the need for compassion and responsibility. When we finally reached port, I gathered my notes and prepared to share the story with others. I knew that Victor's legacy would live on, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of the importance of empathy and the ethical considerations of our actions. My name is Robert Walton, and this is the story of Victor Frankenstein. It is a story of ambition and responsibility, of the consequences of our actions, and of the enduring power of compassion. May we all learn from its lessons and strive to build a better, more understanding world.